Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 66. It's hard to believe when we began this series that we'd be here 66 weeks later and continuing the broadcast with so many more questions continuing to come in. It's just a testimony to the power of Chassidus, to the need of applying Chassidus to our personal lives. And it's a tribute to all the questions that you have continued to ask, your comments, your feedback. So I encourage those that have asked questions and those that have not to please continue to do so. And if you have not, to try to do so now anonymously at meaningfullife.com/mylife. The questions are new ones. Some of them are in the same categories, but every question is unique because every question reflects a person's personal life and personal life struggle or issue. And in that sense, it's completely valuable and necessary. And my challenge, and I hope I do justice to some extent, to take from the Maimorim, the Siches, the stories of Chassidus, from the Rabbeim, and applying it to these particular questions. So we'll continue to address more questions, some questions that came in a while ago, some new questions. As well, I'd like to also encourage you to go read the essays of the essay contest that we ran before Pesach, which every week we send it out. If you subscribe to our weekly newsletter, you can get the weekly essay that we're sending every week, an essay. We also post it at meaningfullife.com/mylife/contest. Later in the show, we'll be reviewing 3 new superb essays, as we've been doing in the last number of weeks. As has been the tradition, let us begin with Chassidus Applied to Inyana Diyema. Today is Pesach Sheini. Later in the week will be Lag BaOmer. So let's talk a few minutes about these 2 special days and the Chassidus Applied in each of them. Chassidus Applied Pesach Sheini, as we all know, Pesach Sheini says in Shulchan Aruch is a day we don't say Tachrim. Many have the custom of eating matzah, but it's based on commemorating something that happened at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, after the Jews brought the Korban Pesach, and some of them were Tomei, some B'derech Recheka, which also became, of course, the mitzvah Pesach Sheini and Beis HaMikdash. Those 2 those possibilities, so they came to Moshe Rabbeinu and cried out, Lama Nigara, why are we deprived of this Korban Pesach? And as a result, only time in Torah which initiated, and the Eibishter gave another mitzvah, another chance to do a mitzvah, to bring a Korban Pesach exactly a month later from Pesach Rishon. So on Yud Iyar, 1 month after Pesach, Yud Nisan, there was the mitzvah Pesach Sheini. And today we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, but we commemorate it. But Chassidus turns it into something more than just a commemoration and more than just a minig, more just a tefillah. The Rebbe's focus on Pesach Sheini is based on the famous Hayom Yom of this day, Nishtokim Farfallen. It says Nishtokim Farfallen. Meaning nothing is ever lost. There's always a second chance. And this is based on, this is a word from the Frierdiker Rebbe that he said in the Sikh of Pesach Sheini Tov Shin Aleph. A little more than a month before the Rebbe would come to America, this Sikh was said by the Frierdiker Rebbe. It's printed in Sefer HaSichos Tov Shin Aleph, page 113. I encourage everyone to read it. It's a very powerful Sikh. But what does he say there? The full context of it, he actually says, as a da vod b'Chassidim, there's a vod b'Chassidim, that there's 3 Sheinis. There's 3 Sheinis. Nefesh HaSheini, Cheder Sheini, and Pesach Sheini. And he goes on to explain, Nefesh HaSheini is what the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, is Megala, the idea of Nefesh HaSheini, the Nefesh HaLekis, the divine soul. Cheder Sheini, the Frierdiker Rebbe says, Ki Yidua the Chassidishe Shul, the Chassidishe synagogues, they built a Cheder Sheini that was called the Chabadnitze, a second room. Both in Lubavitch and in 770, in many places, a Cheder Sheini. Besides the main shul, there's a second shul. Upstairs in 770, it's Cheder Sheini, was always called. Von wem hat man das gemacht? Von who was this made? Von Rabbonim passt doch nicht. Shochtim haben doch keine Zeit nicht. Rabbonim, it doesn't pass, it doesn't fit that they should have that. Shochtim don't have time. No, for Chassidishe Balabatim, Chassidishe Laymen, haben gewusst, als man darf sich hereinchappen in Chabadnitze. Chassidische laymen knew that they have to reinchappen, they have to get themselves somewhere into Cheder Sheini. So that's the second Cheder Sheini. And Hagimel, the third, is Pesach Sheini. Shenyoni as in Nishtokim Farfallen. We can allemal verrichten. Afil misha hayatome b'derech lachekon afil lachem hakavona shoya etzli b'rotzen hatei v'makom mokim efsher l'saka. Which essentially translated simply means that even if somebody is tome, impure, spiritually impure, or was b'derech lachekon, distant, spiritually distant, and if even though it's lachem, which means it could have been b'rotzen, it wasn't a mistake, it was b'rotzen hatei, if a person did it intentionally, the negative things, nevertheless, it could always repair. And the Friedrich Rebbe concludes, is as menem dem nefesh ha-sheni, me geht rein in cheder sheni, mit dem Wert a Pesach sheni, as es wird als mesuken. When you take the nefesh ha-sheni, the second soul, which is the divine soul, which every person has, even if it may be latent, dormant within a person, and you go into the cheder sheni, which means you connect yourself to Chabad to Chassidus, then you have Pesach sheni you could always repair. So that's the full context of it. Now, when you read the Sikha, it's very interesting. I just want to point out a few things. The whole Sikha is made of Dika Sikha, the Pesach Sheni Tavshin Aleph. But there's particularly what I wanted to point out that Friedrich Rebbe says, and I'll translate, it's very difficult to hear the excuse that people give from Shini Hamokim Vazman, that things are different today, and the time and place is different, which means, essentially, it's not the same time. It was not like it was in the Alta Haim, different times when people were more Chassidish and more, and so on and so forth. Which of course applies also to the concept of after Gimel Tammuz. He says it's hard to hear this excuse. Why? Das ist Sheker Gomer, he writes. It's absolute false. Chassidim können in alle Zeiten sein, wie es darf sein. Chassidim can always be the way they should be. Because in truth we've inherited it, you only have to reveal it. And he goes on to compare it to a song, to Negina, how Negina reveals something that may be hidden. Very strong words. Similar in other places, just to refer to another place, the Friedrich Rebbe says in the Sikh in Achon Pesach, Tovshin Beis, a similar thing, that the Taina as in der Heim is given anders, is in ganzen nit ken Taina. To say at home is different, is not a Taina, val bechlal hom mir nit ken Heim. After Golas, we don't have a home. Same idea, it's on page 104 in Tovshin Beis, Sefer HaSichos Tovshin Beis. But the words are very powerful and very relevant to us, Chassidus Applied, because this basically eliminates this excuse that things are different, we can't do what they did. The Friedrich Rebbe is saying, we're not saying that we have to live up necessarily to the exact standards that older Chassidim or older Chassidim, but each in their own generation, each in its time, is the foundation of Yiddishkeit. That Torah is nitzchis, Chassidus is nitzchis, and there's no such thing as saying that it's only relevant to a particular time, God forbid, or a particular space. And the whole idea that this is the theme of Pesach Sheni, of course. That's why he says that every person has a Nefesh HaSheni. Nefesh HaLekiz doesn't disappear after Gimel Tammuz. It didn't disappear over the years, God forbid. And the Cheder Sheni is our connection to the Rebbe, the connection to the Shul, Chabadnitz as he puts it. And that brings a Pesach Sheni that nothing is lost. In psychological terms, take away all the lingo that for some people may be intimidating or may be a turn-off because it was used like a stick over their heads. In simple psychological terms means that we all have everything we need within ourselves to overcome any challenge. And even if a person made a mistake, and even if it was intentional, lochem as he said, nevertheless, the Pesach Sheni teaches there's no such thing as impossible. There's no such thing as no second chance. You always have the ability. Why? Not because God is merciful only, but because you have it within you, as he makes it clear. You have it within you. The only thing is you have to reveal it. So you have the divine soul within you, you have the connection to the Rebbe, the Chabadnitz, the Cheder Sheni within you, and now when you access that gives you the ability to believe that everything is possible. In all healing, one of the hardest things is to teach the person who feels that they're damaged goods, or they're broken, or it's too late for them, because they've suffered, or they made mistakes, or others have made mistakes, they've been betrayed, or they betrayed. And this may be in marriage, this may be in personal life, this may be in so many areas of a person's life. Pesach Sheni is the most psychological lesson telling you there's no such thing. Sheker Gomer. A person has always the capacity. The fact that you may not know it, or that you become a creature of habit, and you don't believe in yourself, that's our weakness, that's our blind spot. That's why we need each other. That's why we need to read these sikhs. That's why we need to talk to each other and encourage and bring out that eternal spring of optimism which lies within each person's soul and each person's life. So there you go, a lesson. The Rebbe adds in a number of places an additional point, which is not directly in the Sichet Pesach Tov Aleph, even though you could argue that it's hinted to, that the whole initiation of how Pesach Sheini came was not just God came one day or Moshe Rabbeinu came and said, hey, listen, I'm giving you a second chance. That itself came from a cry. They cried out, Lomen Nigora. Lomen Nigora, as the Rebbe explains in a number of Sichos, shows that when a person cries out, that alone gives you more hope. That alone gives you the second chance. So that itself, that we have another chance and that everything is possible, it came from a person's cry of anguish. Which this also hope that even if you may not see the solution, even if you may not see the light at the end of the tunnel, even if you may not see how you're going to get out of your difficult situation, the mere fact that you allow yourself to be aware and not in denial and not make believe everything is going well, and you cry out, that cry, that break of silence, in the context of Chassidus Applied psychologically, that alone opens up doors and says, here's Pesach Sheini. Here's a capacity for you to it can always repair, even if you were tamei or derech recheke, even if you were in some way impure or inappropriate, or you were in some way you wandered off. So this also does not let us off the hook in saying, for me it's too late. For me it's too late. Why? Because I already wandered off, I already defiled myself, I already lost my innocence. So you could argue, too late. No, Pesach Sheini comes and says there's no such thing. So in case you're wondering, it's not just for tzaddikim. Pesach Sheini is particularly for people who may have that consideration. And this idea. So the mere concept to say, out of humility, we are a lower generation, we're not capable. The Frierdiker Rebbe is completely dismissing that option actually makes us more responsible. That may not make all of us comfortable. Sometimes we feel, for me it's too late. For me, too late is absolutely antithetical to any type of dignity of a human being, of a soul, and definitely to Chassidus, to Torah, and to Chassidus. So Pesach Sheini carries in it a tremendous lesson, no matter what subject we're going to be speaking about, no matter what issue you deal with. There's always that element where we become paralyzed, or we feel we can't move on, or it's too late for me. I'm too hurt, I'm too damaged, I'm too broken, I'm too defiled. That answer is absolutely not true, because then you're basically giving up on your inner soul and your connection to the Chabadnitza, the Cheder Sheini, which brings into the Pesach Sheini. Now, what about Lag BaOmer? Lag BaOmer is carrying on the same theme. One of the major themes, Eid Hagal Hazeh, Gal is the Asius Lag, Lamed Gimel, as he explains in the Siddur of the Mittler Rebbe, Siddur Imdach. I should say, even though we call the Mittler Rebbe Siddur, the Mittler Rebbe was the one that published it. He gathered all the Alter Rebbe's Biyurim explanations on Tefillah and put it into a Siddur which we call Siddur Imdach. So there's a Shar Lag BaOmer. He talks there about Eid Hagal, which is what Lavan said to Yaakov when they made the bris, that this would be the boundary. So Chassidus explains that what Rashbi accomplished is that he broke down the boundary between Nigla and Pnimius, which is between the body and the soul, both in Torah and in life. That in general life is structured in a way where there's an inner and an outer, and there's a certain type of dissonance, or at least two worlds, of what's on the outside, what's on the inside. And the Rashbi, who was unique in the fact that he joined together Pnimis HaTorah, who was the author of the Zohar, and of course he was a major force as one of the students of Rabbi Akiva that survived the massacre, the epidemic that happened in Sfiras HaEmer, which we'll talk about in a moment, was one of the great masters of Talmud. And Rashbi combined both Pnimius and Nigla, which in personal and in emotional and psychological terms, it means that when things are going regularly, you could probably get away sometimes. You have a body, you have a soul, you have a material life, you have a spiritual life. But for a true integrated life to be healthy, and especially with there's challenges, you need to be able to have a seamless flow between the soul and the body. Mechanical Judaism without a soul is dead, like a corpse, a guf b'lei neshama, and a soul without a body is obviously not grounded. And the Rashbi was one of the unique people, the first, the time of the Talmud, that combined these two elements. When the Rebbe would speak Lag Ba'omer, especially by the parades, and other sikhs, one of the two themes the Rebbe always spoke about, that Lag Ba'omer has two elements. One was a positive and one seemed to be a negative, or addressing a negative. The negative was that till Lag Ba'omer, there was the Gzeira, because the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva did not show respect to each other, therefore there was an epidemic and they died. And there were a few that remained. And Lag Ba'omer, the epidemic stopped. So it's a day of simcha. That's why we don't do weddings and other joyous occasions and music and so on in Sfira because of that epidemic. But Lag Ba'omer is different, because that's when it stopped. And the second thing is that it's Histalkus, Yom Hilula, and Yom Simchosei of Rashbi, because Rashbi asked that this should be a day of simcha, of joy. These are the two themes. The theme of Avos Yisrael, to counter what the students of Rabbi Akiva did, and the theme of Rashbi. Once in a while, the Rebbe would connect the two. First of all, of course, Rashbi was one of those students, but the connection of the two is fascinating in our own personal lives. Because at the end of the day, what was the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva? They separated each other. And Rashbi united. He united Nigla and Pnimius, and therefore also was one of the students that represented the Klal Gadol B'Teira that Rabbi Akiva taught. So Chassidus asked the question, the Rebbe asked the question, they heard Klal Gadol B'Teira, they heard Avos Yisrael, V'Ahavta Recha Kamecha is the foundation of the entire Torah. In the words of Hillel and the Gemara and Shabbos. Or it's a Klal Gadol B'Teira in the words of Rabbi Akiva. It's a Klal Gadol, a fundamental principle. And yet, Leinogu Kovid. So the answer given is not because they were low souls, because they were great souls, but they didn't know how to coexist. Each one was so passionate about his opinion that they could not coexist. So the lesson is that how do we coexist even when we're different? And Rashbi teaches that because he was able to combine both the nigla and pnimius of a soul and a body and of people as well. That's why you find Rashim Veichai a very interesting thing, similar with Arizal. And fascinating similarity. Both Yortzites are in sad times. Lag Ba'omer is the middle of Sfira and stops the sadness of the Omer, of Sfira, of the day of the epidemic, and the Arizal's Yortzeit is Hey Ov, right in the middle of the 9 days, right before Tisha B'Av. Both Sfira and the Churban Beis Hamikdash were due to Sinas Chinam. There was Lein Nogu Kavod Zeh B'Zeh, they did not honor each other, and the 9 days is due to the Sinas Chinam, the baseless hatred. Our Father blesses us when we're all one. When there is no unity, God forbid, blessings don't have a place to rest. A father cannot come and see when his children are fighting with each other. So Sfira Seimer, that was the experience, and then Rashbi came and he stopped that Gzeira in a sense. His teachings are the secret to creating unity. And you see, Taka, the same thing with Arizal, but you see something unique. Both of them were universally accepted by everybody. Even though throughout history you'll find different schools of thought and different ways of approaching it, everybody accepts Arizal and the Rashbi. Both Chassidim and non-Chassidim, Litvaks and so on, Ashkenazim and Sfardim. These are two uniting forces. Arizal, in the most fascinating way, united all the Jews. Arizal affected Halacha, Magen Avram, and as I said, Sfardim, Ashkenazim. And the same thing with Rashbi. In Miran, Lag Ba'omer. Some people make a pilgrimage, some do not, but the bottom line is it's a day of simcha for all Jews. Because these two forces, both were uniting Nigla and Pnimius. And when you connect inner and outer, that's where you find the formula for unity. So the lesson to us, my friends, is simple. That we have two options. We either are self-absorbed, and even for self-absorbed with holy things, we become a pirud, there becomes a separation and divisiveness, God forbid. Or we recognize a deeper force that connects us all, that despite our diversity, there's a soul that is overriding connection, as he says in Perek Lamed Beis from Tanya, Av Echad L'Kolana, and Kula Masimis, and Miyadei Gdulasa, and we do not know each person's soul. Every one of us is indispensable, and each of us need each other in the fullest sense of the word. So the lesson both of Pesach Sheini and of Lag Ba'omer is the sense that despite our challenges, we have the capacity to overcome any situation. And Kedai Lismach Alav, Rashbi said, Kedai Rab Shimon Lismach Alav, Afila B'Shas Adchak, even B'Shas Adchak, very similar to the words of Tomei or Rocheka, even when it's difficult, as the Rebbe brings from the Munketscher, Minchas Aloz, Shas Adchak is Golos. That even B'Shas Adchak and Golos, when we have difficulty, we can rely on the Rashbi for whom there was no churban, as the Rav Hill brings the name of the Alter Rebbe, because he was above it. Why was he above churban? There was a churban Beis HaMikdash. Did he sit Shiva on Tisha B'Av? Simply, probably, yeah. But his soul was one that was higher than Chassidus HaKelim, higher than the breakage of vessels and the containers, which is a model for the students of Rabbi Akiva. It is the Teyu. They're very powerful energies, but they don't coexist. They don't have the bittul and the humility to coexist. Now, Rashbi himself went through 2 stages. 12 years he was hiding in the cave, and when he came out, he was so refined that wherever he went, whatever he looked at began to burn. So the Eibusha sent him back for a 13th year, bar mitzvah, maturity. Spiritual power is great, but you have to repair the world, not burn the world. And the 13th year he came out, whatever he looked at, he repaired. So he could have also gone through that stage, which could have been similar, of intolerance, in holiness, a holy and spiritual intolerance of things that are petty and superficial. Our mission is not to is to repair, not to break, even in the name of holiness. So enough said about these 2 themes. Much can be learned on all of this. And let's move on to some questions. On being vegetarian, what does Chassidus say about being a vegetarian? Question 2 in the same field. Weren't Adam and Eve vegetarian before the flood, the Mabul? Torah says that they were not allowed to kill an animal. They only had to eat from the Esav, from vegetation. What gives man the right to consume another creature's flesh? What gives man the right to devour any of God's creations simply to perpetuate his own existence? And question number 3, I do not eat meat. I do not like meat. Why is this such an integral part of Shabbos, Yontif, and this concept of celebrating with a Suda, joy that comes through meat? Is my vegetarianism contrary to being a frum Jew? Okay. So let's begin. Several aspects to this. I want to begin by sharing a sikha. Again, a sikha from the Frierdiker Rebbe that he talks about the Rebbe Rashab. This was Rosh Hashanah, second day of Rosh Hashanah, by the Suda, by the meal, Tavshin Ches. It would be 1947. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says the following, that my father, the Rebbe Rashab, he once said to somebody who was a vegetarian, he writes, someone who doesn't eat meat. Favos estu das nit? Mishum balachayim? Why don't you eat it? Because it's a balachayim? Because it's from a live creature? Nu, was the est, bist du sicher? And that which you eat, are you sure about? So then was men zet nit, men hert nit is mechayev as the mitzias nita. Because, since when? Because you don't see something, you don't hear it, does that compel us to say that that doesn't exist? That's the Tavshin Ches Sichas, printed in Sefer HaSichas, Tavshin Ches, to Tavshin Vav, to Tavshin Yud, together on page 164. How much can be learned from this? What is the Rebbe Rashab saying? Basically, that this argument that you don't want to shed blood of another creature, and what right do we have to do so? And then when you eat something that's a vegetable, that you do know what you're doing. Just because the blood doesn't spill, who says you're not destroying a form of life? Just because you don't see it or hear doesn't mean that something doesn't exist there. So in other words, the argument that makes us uncomfortable or queasy is not a legitimate one. If that's the case, you shouldn't be touching vegetables or minerals for that matter. Now, most people would not be able to abide by that because then we wouldn't have anything to eat. So the excuse that we must consume another form of life, why is vegetable and mineral less of a problem? Especially when you know this famous sikha where the Frierdiker Rebbe writes about the Rebbe Rashab went with him for a walk in the forest. They went in the woods, and the Frierdiker Rebbe, in deep absorption, began to rub tear off a leaf and began to rub it. And his father reprimanded him that this leaf has its own life, has its own trajectory. Why are you taking it and rubbing it and destroying it for no reason, besides Bal Tashchis? From a Jewish perspective, especially from a Chassidish, Kabbalistic perspective, everything in this world is sacred because it's divine. And it has divine sparks in it, and it has its own hashgacha pratis. Even a leaf turning over in the street, the Baal Shem Tov says, everything. We have no right to intervene. So what right do we have to consume anything, whether it's mineral, vegetable, or animal? It's only because God, the Creator, who created everything with its trajectory, said, I'm giving you an ability to elevate the world. And in a chanami, if a person eats a piece of food, whatever food that is, it doesn't make a blessing, God forbid, or doesn't eat it with the right intention or eats it with a destructive intention, then as the Pisgim Chassidim say, Chassidus says that the cobblestones cry out when a wicked person walks on them. What right do you have to walk on me? An apple in the tree, a fruit of the vine, a vegetable, mineral, definitely an animal. When you eat it and consume it for your own indulgence, and then you do something with the energy you gain from that food, destructive, that animal, that vegetable, and that mineral can come to you and say, what right did you have to tear me off that tree, to kill me in order to indulge yourself? I wasn't defying God's will. I was doing what God planned me to do. You came, destroyed my life, and used it for something destructive, which never would have happened on my own. Because animals, lemishanim tafkidam, definitely vegetable and mineral, as Tanya brings, that they don't change their course, their destiny. They follow the guidelines, the clock is that God created them. However, when a person goes and makes a blessing and uses the keach, the energy, the flesh and blood, dama basar kipsari, that he gains from the food that he consumed after it's digested, and it turns into his energy and uses it for a mitzvah, then the mineral, the vegetable, and the animal come and thank you and say, without you, I would never have been elevated to do a mitzvah, to do a good deed, to help another person, to be constructive. I would have not defied God, but I would not have gone to a greater level. As the Torah Shalom Chassidus brings from the Ikrim, that Daimim is consumed by Tzemeach and elevates to Tzemeach. Tzemeach is elevated to Chai, to animal, and animal is elevated to the human. So we are the human beings, have the capacity to elevate and refine the world. And that's our right, which of course explains the two seemingly contradictory answers in the Mishnah, when the Mishnah says, why was the person created last? Why was Adam and Eve created last? They're the crown jewel of creation, the whole purpose of creation. Why were they created on the sixth day, the last of all creatures? And the Mishnah answers two answers. One answer, it says in Sanhedrin. One is in order to tell us, because first way, that's the way you are. Muchal Nesuda. When you invite a guest to a table, you don't first bring the guest and then set the table. You set the table, then you invite a special guest. So they came last. After the whole table, the world was created. The second answer says, Afili yitush kadmacha. You should know that even a lowly insect, a yitush, preceded you. So it's a lesson in humility. Which one is it? If you're the special guest or you're even lower than an insect, that depends how we behave. If you behave like a guest, like the crown jewel, like the gift that God created the human being to elevate and refine the world, la'avda l'shamra, to protect and to refine and elevate the world, then you are the special guest. If, on the other hand, God forbid, you destroy or you do something destructive, then even a yitush precedes you, because the yitush, the insect, did not defy God's will. So it precedes you. Don't think you're anything special. The insect is more special than you because it never defied God's will and you did. So bottom line is, this whole topic of vegetarianism and consuming, if you're talking about protecting the sanctity of the universe, there's nothing more powerful than the Torah's approach to Bal Tashchas, that you can't even rub a leaf for no reason, let alone consume a mineral, vegetable, and animal. And the Rebbe Rashab, in those few words, is saying, "Was the estia vestia?" You do know. Now, regarding the actual, for health reasons, or the actual, nothing to do with our personal preference, because I can't deal with the killing of an animal, because then you should also not be able to deal with the killing of a leaf. That's another story. For health reasons, and Enochanami, before the Mabul, you could see, yes, animals were not killed, not because we didn't have the right to kill animals. God could have given the right, because Chassidus explains, when it explains, Am Oretz is Osir Lechel Basar, Am Oretz, who doesn't know how to refine, is not allowed to eat meat, because eating meat is taking a live entity and refining and elevating is a lot more difficult than elevating Tzemeach and Chai, vegetation Tzemeach and Daimim, vegetation and mineral. And that's why you need a lot more keich. So before the Mabul, when people lived, Chassidishe Farbrengen, they lived long lives, they had a lot of power, but they didn't have the power on their own to be able to refine a more difficult birurim. After the Mabul, as it's explained, when the Eibishter did not give that same B'chazdish HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that such long life, and now comes down, there was a Yerida in the world. The world became mushkas, there was hashchasa, there was corruption, and so on. Now we were given the power to also elevate from the bottom up, also the animal, as Chassidus explains. But that doesn't mean we don't learn about the vegetarianism of Adam and Chava and before the Mabul, because there is a refinement when you don't eat animal. Animal is a less refined form of life. That's why the whole laws of kashrus and kosher and so on is only regarding an animal. You don't have it regarding mineral and vegetable, because there you have to take a lot more care, even on a physical level. Look at the digestive system to digest meat, to digest animal food products, kosher ones, are all more difficult. It takes more time. All the laws of digestion of 6 hours between milk and meat, and so on, between meat and milk, I should say, and meat is all as a result because of the long digestive process, which also indicates on the long spiritual difficult birurim. But like everything that is harder to be mevarer has higher sparks, and therefore has higher power. That's why Shabbos and Yontif, not to indulge, but there's a mitzvah, because it's the mitzvah to take even the sparks that exist in the animal world, which is far more intense, and elevate those sparks. But people who make the choice, vegetarianism is not antithetical to Torah at all, for health reasons or for other reasons, because on the contrary, if a person chooses that, the people who vegetarians often talk about being far more healthy. There's definitely more bacteria and other things, and this is more of a medical health decision. But to say that somebody does have meat, some people who are vegetarians halachically will Shabbos and Yontif have a little meat, doesn't mean a lot, and so on. Then you have vegan, which is no fish and no eggs at all. Different levels here. So it's not antithetical to Chassidus or to Torah to be vegetarian, but not for the reason because you're simply not comfortable with animals being killed. Because if that's the case, as I just pointed out, you could say the same with vegetable and mineral. But for the other reason, for health reasons, and perhaps for a person's own personal refinement, not to indulge. They say the Rebbe rarely touched meat, maybe on Shabbos and Yontif. So now mitzvah to eat meat every day. As Itche the Masmid, when he came to America, he wrote back, he said, it's a country where every day they eat basar, every day they eat meat. It was like a chiddush for him. So it's not a mitzvah to do so. But at the same time, it is allowed for the reasons I just explained, but clearly it requires far more effort. And you talk about birur and refinement, you need to be more worthy. Now, if we call ourselves all Amaratzim, we probably then maybe not allowed to eat meat, but that's another discussion. I'm not getting into the halachas of that, but it's the same idea that it comes down to being able to refine, not just to indulge ourselves and enjoy ourselves. Okay, let's move on. So it's a little follow-up, some other subjects that were brought up. Let's talk about divorce crisis follow-up. Last week's candid conversation about divorce opened the dialogue for people who feel unhappy or having doubts in their marriage, eliciting many questions and comments from viewers. So now, I'd like to read a few questions that came in. What advice and hope can be given to those who have been unhappily married for many years? Are we doing our children a favor by staying unhappily married? Can a stagnant marriage be revitalized? I'll address some of that, even though we have talked about it in many different episodes previously. But since it's coming in questions regarding that in context of this discussion, I'll address some of it as well. But let's begin with feedback. I'll read an interesting letter. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, your comments about the deeper dimension that keeps a marriage together despite the changes of time was powerful and profound. Since you're zeroing in on this marriage essential was part of our reply to the issue of high frequency of divorce, Rahman al-Islam, that is plaguing this generation, please allow me to add the following. I think it's worthwhile reading, so even though it's not so short, I'll read it. Often a husband or wife will go for professional counseling either because of stress or depression, or difficulty in the marriage, etc. The counselor will tell their client, in effect, the most important thing is to be happy. And if your marriage is too stressful, then perhaps you should consider other options. I have witnessed secular professionals impress this on non-frum and frum individuals. I have even witnessed a frum counselor do this to a frum young married couple. In these instances that I witnessed and was familiar with the specifics, this so-called permission to divorce granted by the professional paved the way for divorce and devastation that followed. As much as divorce is Gehenim, the real protected Gehenim begins after the divorce. Real protracted Gehenim, I should say. I didn't misread. The real protracted Gehenim begins after the divorce. And that applies to most everyone in the wide circle of individuals affected. These professionals are completely wrong. The most important thing is not to be happy. The most important thing is to be responsible. I just want to interject. I don't think that the man wrote, whoever man or woman wrote this, is meaning to say most important thing is to not be happy. It means most important is not being happy is the most important thing. So I would rephrase that somewhat, because it can come across as marriage is meant to be not be happy. Most important thing is to be responsible. Responsible to your commitment to the one you married. Responsible to your children and their future children and every other individual whose life will be unalterably bent out of shape on account of your taking this last resort step, when in the vast majority of instances it is not the last resort. It is about time that people were taught prior to getting married that. Now I read this again because these are very good points. Getting married will overhaul every facet of your life in ways you cannot prepare for in advance. Don't ask, why is this happening to me? This is normal. Getting married will put two opposite genders together 24/7, and each one will endure a steep and arduous journey of learning how to live together and harmonize each other. During this journey, you will hear from your spouse things you would rather not hear. Let it be known that your spouse may, at least from time to time, be correct. Just maybe you still have some character refinement work to do, which your like-minded friends did not tell you about. This journey is designed to extract you from the center of your universe, which heretofore was yourself, and to place you in a life of other person consciousness. Conscientiousness. That is when you discover the bliss that results from other person conscientiousness, also known as a happy marriage and shalom bayis. A most powerful piece of marriage advice is to be found in the MyLife Essays that we recite at a wedding. The Rebbe states that for every hashpah done right, the beginning is the creation of an aura, hashpah chitzenis, then making steady steps of approach, which also includes taking a step down from where you are presently to level with the mushpa. And these steps of approach elicit from the recipient a gravitation towards you and thus be primed for a mutually uplifting, connecting experience. The natural follow-through is an intimate union called hashpah pnimis. In simple English, to have a happy marriage, you have a responsibility to generate the right aura in your home. You have the responsibility to align your words and actions with the personality that is your spouse. And the same goes for children and others you interact with in your home. This groundwork naturally cultivates intimate connection and shalom bayis. All of this is a far, far cry from the so-called professionals who state that the most important thing is to be happy. Thank you so very much for your commitment to enlighten and inspire such each and every week. Thank you for your words, well stated, and hope it has its desired and necessary impact on those that need to hear this. Okay, divorce crisis follow-up. Let us now do a few follow-up questions about working on your marriage questions. Now, there are a bunch of questions. I don't believe I can go through all of them, but I'll do a few of them at least. My editorial office notes that marriage questions come up more frequently than Mashiach in the MyLife forum. Just mentioning that as some trivia, perhaps. It should be understood this is personal, and perhaps Mashiach is dependent on having a good, healthy marriage. Question 1. I've been married for about half a year, about a year and a half, I should say, and I've regretted it for almost as long as I've been married. I hate saying this because we have a child. You see, I thought my husband was more than he is. He's very lazy and unmotivated. I worry because he needs a job in order to support us. Baruch Hashem is a small part-time job, but it's not very substantial. Sadly, I look at my friends' husbands, and with my husband was like theirs, motivated, determined, hardworking. And wish my husband was like theirs, motivated, determined, hardworking. Also, he isn't as frum as I thought. Davening and learning, he just isn't interested in. I spoke with someone about it, and they said that these things are between him and Hashem. If that's the case, how come they are serious questions? How come they are serious questions then when looking into someone for shidduchim? I just don't know what to do. We speak about it many times. It's just like talking to a wall. I have to admit that before we got married, I had doubts about it, but I brushed it off because I thought he was cold feet. It was cold feet. I feel helpless. No matter how much I regret my marriage, I don't want to get a divorce because of my child. I can't change the situation. I can't change him. I try to change my outlook, but it doesn't help so much. Please respond in good time. Helpless, confused, and regretful. Okay. There are more questions, but let me just address this one, and the others I'll leave for the coming episodes. Very sad to hear and read, frankly, but as the promise has been on this series, that we do not shy away from any question, people's personal questions. The whole point of Chassidus is not just to address happy times and when things are all going well, but when we have a challenge like this. I don't have a quick fix answer for you or for anyone else that this describes your life situation, but I will say the following. I just began the whole episode today with Pesach Sheini. Let's not look at your husband right now. Let's look at yourself and your own hope. There's no situation in life that God would give us that we cannot resolve, and not through the last resort called divorce. I have no doubt that you need to speak to someone that can help you find an approach. Your attitude has definitely impact on your husband and on your child. Looks like there's a child, not children. So, yes, it may be important to focus on your husband and his working situation and his frumkeit and so on, but also could be your attitude as part of it. You cannot feel helpless, but I can't just preach that to you. The only way to convey that is to say you must find someone to speak to about your hopeful situation. And you'd be surprised there may be some things you need to hear as well in your approach and your attitude. And maybe with a different attitude, maybe something can be elicited in your husband. So we have to look at it from that perspective, that there is always a possibility. There's hashgacha pratis that were brought you both together. God blessed you with a beautiful child. So to say it's hopeless goes contrary to everything that we know in Chassidus, and especially today, Pesach Sheini, as I just earlier read and explained the whole message of it. The Nefesh HaShenis, the Cheder Sheini, and the Pesach Sheini. It's easy to point fingers. It's far harder to find solutions. So the question is, how do we find solutions? That's why we have Chassidus, that's why we have Torah. So I encourage you to find someone you can speak to. And you keep knocking on doors. It's your responsibility to do something about it. Now hopefully your husband, God will bless and give him Yada Alav Ruach Memorim, and suddenly he'll have an awakening, an epiphany. But we're talking about, since you're writing the question, I'm saying this to you. So if you're listening to this, keep this in mind. The life is not over, it begins. This is a challenge. Like every challenge has to be looked at straight in the face and find the right people that can help you deal with this challenge. I have no doubt that some illumination will come from it. What the future holds, we don't really know. But I cannot believe that it's just going to stay stagnant. Your husband was born with a divine soul as well, and he's also not hopeless. Despite even if your description of him is accurate, which may not be completely accurate, but let's say it's accurate, still, to say that it's hopeless, it's just not a Torah and Chassidishe approach. So just like he needs to be perhaps more frum, you also need to have more amunah b'tachan. That itself is also a mitzvah. To have more faith, to have more trust, and to do things about it, to get yourself out of the situation. So yes, it seems like you did speak to someone who told you it's not your job, it's between him and Hashem, fine. But now you need to figure out a strategy how to move forward. And I have no doubt that if you look at your own tools and you have the help of a friend or a mashpia or a chaver and so on, someone that can speak to you, someone on your level, a woman friend, a woman mashpia, no question that you'll be able to get beyond this challenge. And I give you my blessings and prayers that it should happen quickly, but you have action to do, because the situation will not get better if you don't act on it. Okay. Let's go to another subject, which was uninspired by community feedback. What are some practical ways to empower those in the community who have so much to offer but find themselves marginalized? How can we inspire the current leadership to embrace change? What are some actual steps that can be taken to re-energize ourselves and in turn our communities? And the question form, Rabbi Jacobson, I was very impressed that you addressed a topic that is very I'm not sure, very field to many of us, but few want to talk about. That's very relevant, I guess, to many of us, but few want to talk about it. I want to hear some more details and for you to continue with the discussion about feeling uninspired by the community, which you began in episode 64. Question 2. You mentioned about each of us to be leaders and not waiting for someone to do it for us. Can you give us practical suggestions on how to go about it? How can we feel more empowered? As from my personal experience, there are a lot of very capable and vibrant people in my community who are pushed under the carpet, afraid to speak up due to intimidation of the powers that be. The sad thing is many of these souls have started to drift since they are afraid to kick up dust or disturb the status quo. So I want to first of all refer you to our website, meaningfullife.com, and look up bad religious experience. There's a series of 2 articles where I responded to similar questions to individuals And I think those articles speak for themselves. I'll still respond to this, but those are bad religious experiences at meaningfullife.com. A two-part series. One of the hardest things is to teach people how to be empowered. Because by definition, when you don't feel empowered, how do you suddenly tell someone just be empowered? You can't put on a switch. That's why a mindset has to change. The whole point of Chassidus in general, and Chassidus Applied in particular, this series, is to say that when you learn Chassidus and you apply it to your life, it helps change your mindset. It helps change your possibilities. It helps train and recondition your cognitive skills, your emotional skills, and ultimately your behavioral skills. Now you can begin sometimes with behavioral and sometimes with emotional, but in the derech of Chabad Chagas Nihi, cognitive leads to emotional, emotional leads to behavioral. So to tell someone, who feels that if you don't feel empowered, suddenly become empowered. Like in the last question about the woman who's having these difficulties in her marriage. Or the question Nishfa found, when a person is in a state of demoralization, they don't feel strong, to tell them, be strong, obviously is not going to accomplish anything. So you have to empower. And empowerment comes by understanding yourself in a better way. When you understand yourself in a deeper way and you understand your possibilities. Imagine somebody says, I can't swim 1,000 yards. I don't have the ability. But then you discover you do have the ability, but you don't have the experience. It's very different. The same thing, everything in life. The first thing is to understand that you have more ability than you may ever believe. And that comes by learning about it and by being around people who have that type of confidence. How does one become a leader? Hang around leaders. Watch how they behave. Learn from them. Number 2 is teach somebody. Become a leader by acting. Get a chavrusa. You don't have to solve all the problems. Very often our grievances take over our lives. Why I'm not listened to, why my potential is not actualized, I become bitter. Don't be surprised of how much our bitterness affects us. I'm not suggesting all these letters are coming from bitterness, but there's an element of it that I can guarantee you is not helping you grow. It's almost like you want to be fair. You want justice. Leadership begins by action. Find a chavrusa and start learning the way you want to learn. Find someone to influence. Find someone to inspire. Let them inspire you. That's what leaders do. They don't come and suddenly find a solution that solves all the problems. They act in a proactive way. Now, I know saying these things for someone who doesn't feel confidence is not going to help. That's why I'm saying, that's why you have to learn about your own particular potential. And you need to be around people, incubate yourself around people who cultivate that and engender that type of attitude and feeling. Okay. We have to get to the essay, so let me go to one more topic, which the lost art of Farbrenging. Chassidus Farbrengen is vital to the life of a chassid. But what constitutes a true Farbrengen according to the Rabbeim? Often I am left uninspired, one writer writes, and unmotivated. Additionally, it's often difficult to concentrate at Farbrengens where there are groups of people speaking noisily amongst each other while the mashpia is Farbrenging. I also get distracted by those who pull out their cell phones during Farbrengens. In my mind, nothing else should be happening at a Farbrengen other than the Farbrengen itself. How does one treat these individuals who are causing a disturbance? How can we be 100% present at a Farbrengen? What is the proper way to Farbreng? Another one writes. One that has grown up with or been exposed later in life to Chassidus is very familiar with the importance of a Chassidishe Farbrengen. It goes without saying that it is vital to living the life of a Chassid. It could very well be that the fact that I'm distracted comes from my own lacking and requires me to be more active in my avodah. Nonetheless, I feel that there must be someone else out there that has had the same experience. Okay. Thank you for doing this weekly shir. Hatzlacha rabba u'muflaga. Oh, and one more question. In this vein, I've heard that claim that the ability to Farbrengen is a lost art. Do you agree with such a statement? If so, what has been lost and how do we reintroduce it to have a proper Chassidishe Farbrengen? Okay, all the similar idea. Well, going back to the Frierdiker Rebbe's words that it's very difficult to hear that things have changed, time and space. So it's very clear we could have Chassidishe Farbrengens now, and maybe even now more than ever. As the Rebbe said, Tafshin Chavav, 100 years from the Tzemach Tzedek, that one of the things that will keep Chassidim together till Mashiach will be their Achdus. And one of the ways of Achdus is a Chassidishe Farbrengen. So briefly, Chassidishe Farbrengen, as this says in the Sichos and in many of the different writings of the Rabbeim, comes down to Avos Achim, the ability for people to sit down in an informal way and just talk from the heart to heart, without their defenses up, and being able to talk about what matters to them, their connection to the Rebbe, their personal lives, and so on. I don't want to compare it to group therapy because the word taints the whole idea. Chassidishe Farbrengen is not group therapy, but it is personal communication, emotional communion. It's not about sitting and showing off, or one person speaking and everybody else listening. They say the difference between a speech, a party, and a Farbrengen is a speech. One person speaks, nobody listens. A party, everybody's speaking and nobody is listening. And a Farbrengen is nobody is speaking, but everybody's listening. That's a Farbrengen. So sometimes you have a mashpia. He leads the Farbrengen. But his point is not just to talk and lecture. The point is to elicit a reaction with negunim, with l'chaim. Yes, to just come to be yetze, a Farbrengen, because it's a special day, better than staying home maybe. But a Farbrengen is one of the greatest tools we have, and I can't call it a lost art because I've seen Farbrengens that work very well. I think it's all about what we do. The thing with a Farbrengen is really in our control, is the people coming together, not sitting there just to be, not just there to gossip and to be frivolous, but to speak heart to heart about matters. And everybody has their vulnerability, has their issues and so on. Now, obviously, it's not always comfortable to suddenly start speaking about all your personal things in front of everyone, but there's ways to talk about things in couched terms. And Farbrengens can also be one-on-one. Two people can end up Farbrengen together in a corner. Farbrengens can be a little larger group. At the end of the day, the Farbrengen that you go to is what you make of it. You don't have to feel like a victim. I go back to the leadership. If the Farbrengen is not working for you, don't go there. If it's one where everybody's just talking and their cell phones and all that, who says you have to go there? Find yourself a Farbrengen, a smaller one. Find like-minded friends, kindred spirits, who are just ready to sit down, tell a story, learn a sikhe, learn a maimer, hear a recording from the Rebbe, sing a nigun, listen to a nigun from the Rebbe. It's not that complicated. The problem is we have to cease being victims and be speaking like victims. We control our destiny. It's one thing if someone said to you, you have to get up and speak to 1 million people and explain Chassidus. But a Farbrengen is a grassroots effort. It's the Rabbeim geschenkt us. They bestowed upon us a gift. They said there's a Farbrengen with a Rebbe, but then you Chassidim, so Farbrengen. I hear today Shluchim and others on the phone Farbrengen once a week, gather together. Sometimes, obviously, face to face is always better, but it's also not. It's not. And speak. You just speak about something. You read something. It's important to be able to be vulnerable and to be able to be emotional. And this whole toughness, which we were taught, where we don't talk about our issues, is opposite of the whole context of a Farbrengen. Absolutely talk. Things that you're ashamed of, or things that may be not appropriate to talk about. You need to talk to a mashpia or to a friend one-on-one, fine. Farbrengen doesn't mean everything has to be let loose. But the concept of sitting together is very basic. It's basic communion. The communion of souls, kindred spirits, sitting and Farbrenging. It's not that complicated. Unfortunately, as I said, things have become a social groups and social the social interactions, instead of it being that warm and inspiring and personal experience that a Farbrenging is supposed to be like. More to say on this, but because of time, let me stop here with that and move to the essays. The essays and the topics I have not addressed, I'll continue to address next week. So we're going to review 3 essays, which actually, as I was speaking, I wanted to refer to them directly because they directly address some of the things we spoke about today, Hashgacha Pratis, but it shouldn't be so surprising because the essays are meant to be exactly that, applying Chassidus. So applying Chassidus is to our life situations. So I'll review 3 essays, and one of them is in Hebrew. And again, these are posted at meaningfullife.com/MyLife/contest. The 3 essays that we're going to review are, number 1, as I said in Hebrew, let me just get the names here. Sorry about that. Okay. One is L'schaten mechodesh kol yem, or kol yem mechodesh. Schaten mechodesh kol yem. Perpetual marriage, to get married anew every day. This is by Yeshaya Marantz from Israel. The theme of his essay, which is fascinating, even though there are some themes that many of you may have heard, but he takes it to another level, and that is he begins the question by saying, what is the secret of romance according to Chassidus? How is it possible to avoid a stagnant marriage, and such that it should continuously grow and be vibrant and dynamic? And he goes into Chassidus explaining that the relationship that we have with the Eibishter is reflected in the relationship we have with our spouses. And therefore, everything we learn about relationships with God also reflect how we learn relationships with each other. And there he goes on, he brings the famous Torah of the Alter Rebbe. This I found quite surprising, but I found it quite refreshing. Where the Alter Rebbe said, that Tzemach Tzedek brings in the Sheresh Mitzvah Tefillah, I don't want your Gan Eden, I don't want your Elam Haba, I want you yourself. And he applies it to marriage. That marriage is not meant to be with some ulterior motive, not for Gan Eden, not for Elam Haba, or other variations of that in personal gain or profit, but rather a relationship with the other, Imchalei Chafasti. All I want is you. And he applies the Imchalei Chafasti to marriage. Initially, it may sound a little irreverent, but in truth, what better way to apply the Alter Rebbe's Wort to life than personal relationship? So this is a very fascinating essay in that sense. I really enjoyed reading it because that application is tremendous, and he goes through details of how to do that. Obviously, he also talks about the pool nimsheches of a marriage, which is the idea of perpetual, that is constantly renewed in that context. And at the end, he gives, as was required in the guidelines, a practical advice of how to actually renew your marriage all the time. Briefly, these are some of the practical advice that he gives, which, again, comparing the relationship of a human being to each other, spouses, to the relationship with the Eibishter, which is called Yem Chasanose Zemat and Teira, where the Eibishter and the Eden Knesset Yisrael compared to husband and wife. He says, using the eights of the Rebbe that he spoke to somebody who had difficulty with honoring parents, the Rebbe said, write it down, Kabedes Avicha B'Semecha, on a note, and look at it from time to time to remind you. The Rebbe, so he says, he wants to make the similar suggestion. Write down on a note that I don't want anything. I don't want any of your pinukim. I don't want any of your benefits. I don't want any of your expressions, but I want you alone. And look at it from time to time to refresh yourself in your relationship with your spouse. Then he talks about focusing on and meditating on the relationship itself. At least 3 times a day you should give focus to it and not just take it for granted. And then finally to do something every day for your spouse. Not in order to receive some type of reward, but simply to do something because this is your spouse. So I suggest you read the essay. That's essay 1 that we'll review. Another one is Affecting Change, Why Knowledge Really is Power. This goes back to something I spoke about just a few minutes ago, that, and this writer is the writer. This one is the writer is Chani Wilhelm. Affecting Change: Why Knowledge Really Is Power. Nearly 45% of Americans make New Year's resolutions. Of these, a full 25% can't stick with them past 1 week, and just 8% of these resolutions are actually achieved, based on different statistics. A resolution is usually a commitment to self-improvement, which necessitates a change from the status quo. It is obvious then that change is challenging, grueling, and testing, clearly not for the faint of heart. What is it about change that makes it so desired yet equally so elusive? And she goes on to explain that she'll answer this question al pi Chassidus, which is that soul is made up of a link between knowledge, emotions, and actions. She brings from the Frierdiker Rebbe that fixing one's character traits is the main reason for the descent of the soul, and that's how the purpose of creation is realized. So in other words, change is the soul's yearning to fulfill its purpose. And that's why it's so elusive. She brings an example from a teenager who knows that texting while driving is dangerous, and yet 41% of teens admit to texting. Why is that the case? She says because it's not just enough to tell someone it's dangerous, they need to have knowledge. Maisa is a great thing, but it has to come after machshava. The Chassidus teaches that when you're aware of something, you become more conscientious, and therefore it affects your emotions, and will affect even your actions. It's a really powerful essay, I must say. Deserved to be up there, but again, the essays were all so good, it was very difficult to, you can only have one to be the top winner, but this one definitely deserves to be up there, as the others that I've read. And she brings from an author, Stephen Guy's, about mini habits. That he suggests that many people have a hard time implementing change because their goals are too big. So he suggests mini habits. And yet she the writer, Wilhelm, writes that she believes that something's missing, that formula is missing a key ingredient. What the root of the problem has to be addressed, because it's not just the mini habits. And that means you have to be able to re-envision the scenario and be able to understand it better. Knowledge is the key. And she gives a very good example from homelessness. Here's an example. Your knowledge is simple. You walk by, you see a homeless beggar on the street. Your knowledge is simple. This man is homeless. Homelessness is bad, and he probably does not have food for dinner. Your emotions, you feel pity, compassion. Your actions, you give the man $5 from your pocket. Imagine now scenario number 2. Your knowledge is more extensive. You were homeless 10 years ago when you lost your job. You lived on the street for days, accepting handouts. You rummaged through garbage. And she goes on and elaborates. So now your emotions, your heart will summon forth much more than the feelings in scenario 1, and with much more intensity. And that will in turn affect your actions and behavior. You will give the man more than money, perhaps advice, a home for a few nights, a warm meal, or even a job offer. So knowledge is key. And she gives practical suggestions, practical exercises, that in any given situation, when you have to affect change, and change is so elusive and difficult, research of the detrimental results of not changing, of keeping the status quo. Be very aware of the consequences. Meditation on the above detrimental results, not just at the present moment, but for the future as well. Focus on and contemplate on contemplation of the very positive benefits that change will bring to one's life in a clear and organized list. And envisioning one's life with the implementation of the desired change. A very practical essay, which I definitely encourage you to read. Again, it's on our website in the contest section with the essays. And finally, the third essay by Sholem Kesselman, from Los Angeles, When Failure is Really Success. This one actually was very similar to another essay written by Yossi Grosbaum, who was this prize number 2, the second prize winner, and bases on a footnote from the Rebbe in Likutei Sichos that she actually wrote in connection to Yud Gimel Iyar, which was the Rabbi Yisrael Aryeh Leib, the Rebbe's brother's yahrzeit, which was yesterday, about how there's no real Yerida, there's no real descent. He talks about we all fall every now and then, we fall victim to impulses, and so on. How does one free himself of this baggage? So Chassidus, he says, not only provides a solution, but actually offers a radical and daring perspective. Not only are these failures not our worst enemy, they're actually our biggest ally. Explaining that they're all part of a journey and a process to achieve growth. How can we claim that this process is never interrupted of growth? So the Rebbe, in an unassuming footnote, he quotes, proceeds to answer this question with what I believe is one of the most revolutionary insights Chassidus has to offer. And he goes into explain that the whole purpose of existence, in order for it to constantly be repaired, and therefore there's no such thing as a descent that is not part of a higher ascent. Everything is there, and from God's perspective, it's always going up, even though for us it may be looking like it's going down. He explains 2 types of progress, gradual and exponential. Gradual is the steady, predictable, natural growth, and exponential is the unpredictable leap when we jumped into completely new and unfamiliar territory. And there, you often need to have a seeming descent. So every Yerida is necessary for making gradual progress. But for exponential progress, you need to have that Yerida. And he goes on, he brings Rab Zera, who he forgot Talmud Bavli in order to learn Talmud Yerushalmi, and so on. It's a very interesting, as I said, there's a similar essay that actually won the prize, but nevertheless, it's well worth reading, and I commend all these 3, among all the others, and we will continue this in future episodes. As I say again and again, they're fascinating, these essays. I just want to point out, this just a few days ago, someone tells me that essay number 4, I think it was, about the Chassidic approach to overeating, someone says that they actually helped them, since reading that essay, they've lost 10 pounds. So we can attribute to the Chassidus contest, Chassidus Applied, that's actually helping people diet. And there's some people tell me they read that essay again and again and again. So I want to just point out that essay, the Chassidic approach to overeating. But as well as each one of them, I really believe can be life-changing in reading them. They're so heartfelt. The writers really invested their time and very personal. You can sense it in the writing. So I commend you all for these essays. And hopefully soon we'll be announcing the next contest. But let me conclude now. This has been Chassidus Applied, MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 66. Next Sunday we continue, every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Please send us your questions, your comments, your feedback, your rebuttals, anything that you wish to share. It's all anonymous, completely anonymous on the forum at meaningfullife.com/mylife. This has been Simon Jacobson, again, Chassidus Applied, episode 66. Everyone should have a very simchadika week, lag b'emer week, and a week knowing that everything is possible in Shtokim Farfal.